We've been doing our Global Board Diversity Index since 2004. And while boards have diversified, particularly with respect to gender, a whole lot in that time period, committee chairs have not diversified on par with the general diversification. What do you think boards can do to encourage more women to be leading committees on their boards?
The thing I think that that is important is, and it's a theme that we've talked about, is intentionality. So thinking intentionally about, are we having development and succession planning for our committee chairs and for our chair of the board? A lot of times you kind of go on autopilot and then suddenly it's like, wait, the chair is retiring for the audit committee. Wait, we don't have anyone to chair the audit committee. Shoot, we better go get somebody outside. And then when you start a search, if you look for a retired CFO of a public company, you're probably going to get a white guy. But thinking through intentionally, we know this person may retire in a couple of years. How do we get someone now who's on the committee to be, mentored by that person and learning and getting capabilities so that when the time comes, they're ready to step in as chair? And so a couple of boards I'm on now have been really good at that and really proactive in thinking through, how do we map out kind of you do this with a company, like seamless succession planning for CEOs. You got to do the same thing for the board of how do we make sure we are developing and mentoring and ensuring a smooth transition and ideally internally promoting for these chair positions. So, but it requires some thought and some planning, right? Which again is really helpful if you're intentional, especially at the chair and CEO level.
Yeah, and at the nominating committee chair level as well.
Absolutely.
What have you seen boards do well in the short term and the long term with respect to being inclusive as well as diverse?
Yeah, it's so funny. So when I was at PillPack, we had a very young employee base. So our average age of employee was 26. I always joke that if you took me out, I was probably 24. So I was like the oldest person there. And they were so diverse in every kind of color, language, gender, age, and even like just education levels, everything. But we talked a lot about, it's not just about checking these boxes of diversity. And the analogy we said is that, kind of first step is you need to get invited to the dance. So you have to get a ticket to be able to go. So now you're there. We've checked the box, you're there. Right. The second is you need to be invited to go on the dance floor. And so now you need to get the chance to take on a leadership position or to get the role and to get the exposure. But the thing you're really aiming for, which is the inclusion part, is you want to feel like you can dance like nobody's watching. That you can bring your everything, all the richness of your background. One of the things that I think is really interesting about boards is, and you know this well from doing searches, we always talk about culture fit.
That's a really fine line to try to figure out when you're recruiting for a board and trying to figure out culture fit without being biased in unproductive ways.
I think you're spot on, and I will say a couple things. One is I think that the stakes are high because you don't have many people on a board, and it is a long-term commitment. You don't usually try to add someone to the board for 2 or 3 meetings or a year or two. You're trying to add someone for many, many, many years to come, and it's a small group. And so it's harder, and you have to make that leap of faith, and the vetting and all that's really important. But the other thing I would say is that I've seen board members, and I would put myself in that thing where sometimes you just make a mistake and you say something in the wrong way and it doesn't quite fit the culture of that board. The one underlying thing I would say across all of that is trust and intentionality. If you have the trust, you can make a lot of mistakes and you can have a lot of things go sideways. But if you have that trust there, you can kind of figure out how to improve and move on.
What do you think the responsibility of boards is to integrate diversity rather than having it be the responsibility of the new diverse director?
One thing that's interesting is when I reflect on all the boards I've been part of, nonprofit, public companies, private companies, it's just kind of been the case where oftentimes I'm almost always the youngest by far, and in some cases by like multiple decades. I'm usually the only Asian American, oftentimes the only non-white person, and I'm oftentimes the only woman. Sometimes there's one other woman. So when I've joined these boards, my feeling always as a new board member is like, holy cow, like you look at the list of all the board members, which one of these people does not belong? Oh, it's her. We better kick her out soon. And so I sit in these board meetings, especially as a new board member, thinking, how do I just not screw up? How do I not say something stupid that they're going to realize they made a mistake and they're going to kick me off? And so over time, I've realized a couple of things. One is I think that when I was earlier on in my career as a board member, I would be really hesitant to say anything. And on one hand, that's smart because you're listening and absorbing. On the other hand, you're kind of just a rock. And at that point, the longer you go without saying something, the harder it is to say something, because then it's like people are used to you not saying anything. And then if you do say something, it better be like this crazy genius like thing that you've said.
You've been incubating this great thought for years.
Being part of the conversation doesn't always mean I have to be giving a lecture on all my brilliance and all my amazing experience. A lot of times it's just asking good questions to say, hey, I'm brand new to this board, so I'm not sure about this and I don't have all the history, but here's what I've seen at a couple other places. Have you guys thought of that? Or like, is this something that might be relevant for this? Sometimes like even just doing that adds a ton of value because everyone's been down in the weeds and wait, holy hell, why are we talking about this? Like, how does this fit into the macro? And so figuring out your source of power and how to contribute and how to get in the conversation in a low-key way sooner rather than later is helpful.
Yvonne, what is the responsibility of the existing board members, both as a body and as individuals, to behave more inclusively, to bring out the best in a new director, particularly when that new director is diverse?
I thought of one other thing that could be helpful here, Dick, which is that there is a group dynamic. There is a kind of a family culture, and in that dynamic, little things can go a long way. So I was just mentioning that, sending a small note or saying see someone in the bathroom and being encouraging, it can go the other way too. So if I'm a new board member and I say something, I ask a question or I summarize something, and I get shut down, where people just move on. They don't even acknowledge my comment, or someone disagrees with me, or says, wait, that we shouldn't even talk about that. Let's move on. Like, those little signals can go a long way to actually making someone feel very unwelcome and to setting the tone of like, don't talk unless you're, spoken to, and this is a board that doesn't. So just being thoughtful about how some of these small things, it might not even be intentional, but how some of these small things can set you on a very positive dynamic and really great momentum. Or to the converse, these little small things can sometimes really shut a board down and shut down dialogue. And so I think being aware of those signals and those messages are really helpful, and trying to be more on the positive side and build that momentum is really important.